Find death before death finds you. There was a spiritual teacher, philosopher in the early 20th century from Gurdjieff, from Russian area, remember there. He later moved to France and taught there. He had an interesting. He said people have a personality and essence, and he said many people have a strongly developed personality and virtually no essence, and it's very rare for people to have more essence than personality. It was an interesting way of looking at it, and that's of course how it is that I'm now elaborating. There's only a little bit of that, and then he dropped the whole matter, and then he didn't talk about it again. So the essence, there are two dimensions in your identity. There is the form identity, the you as form, with your physical form and your name and all your knowledge and education and abilities and your past, whatever happened in your past. That's all connected, and it all makes up who you are on the level of form, who you perceive yourself to be, and who others see you. And there is a connection between how the world or other people see you and how you see yourself. And when you are trapped exclusively in a form identity, so you only know yourself as a form identity, then how other people see you is of extreme importance to you, because it contributes to how you see yourself. So you might become self-conscious, and self-conscious in English means that you're very much aware of how you're being perceived, and you feel always a little uneasy because you feel observed and people are judging you, and you want to appear in a certain way. And there's a natural tendency in humans to emphasize their form identity to the world. It's a natural thing, so you can't tell a little child when the little child begins to say, or says, you're observing that one child says to the other child, look, I can do this, you can't do what I can do this, but you can't. Or the child says, my dad has a bigger car than yours. You can't say to the child, don't do that. You are emphasizing your form identity. But you know that's what's happening. It's a natural tendency in humans to emphasize. It could be a possession, I have more than you. It could be my body looks better than yours, or is stronger than yours, or bigger than yours, or taller than yours. Or it could be, I have an ability that you don't have. Children start with that, and I can play the piano. What can you play? I play the ping pong machine. So to emphasize form identity is a natural thing. There is a point where this should come to a natural conclusion. I would say in a more evolved humanity, the emphasis of form identity as a person reaches adulthood, a little bit after, is replaced. At the moment, this is not what's happening, but can be replaced by something more genuine and deeper. And that is finding your essence identity that's underneath your form identity. And that is spiritual dimension, finding the spiritual dimension in yourself, so that who you think you are is no longer, you still have a form identity. Yes, that level is still there, undoubtedly. You have certain abilities. You're good at this, you're not good at that. You're better than the other person in this thing, but not as good as in the other thing. That remains. But it no longer gives you your sense of who you are. And that can only happen when something else arises that is deeper than the form, and that's the presence. And when the presence arriving in you, it has no form and is not tangible, it's there pervading your entire being, then suddenly you realize and you feel who you are essentially has nothing to do with what you possess, how your body looks, your abilities, what you can do, or what you know. That's another one, that's form identity with what I know. I know more than you. So then comes the realization, who you essentially are is nothing to do with possessions or looks or physical or mental abilities or other abilities, but it comes from a much deeper place. And that deeper place no longer operates through comparison. Your essence identity does not deepen because it's stronger than somebody else's essence identity. You don't compare yourself anymore to others in order to find out who you are. And that's such a liberation from only knowing yourself as that particular form, because with that comes a lot of suffering. A lot of suffering comes when who you are is derived from the form of you. Because at some point, if you have good looks, and then who you are is based mostly on that, and you feel superior to most because you look so much better, then you look down on all these other people who are not good looking at all. And then you even emphasize it. You look even greater with the wonderful things you wear. And then, as the decades pass, you look in the mirror, and there's something wrong. Slowly, and you notice that the mirror seems to be becoming defective. It no longer shows you the beauty of who you are externally. And then you need to pay for repair jobs. But even there, it's just postponing the suffering that inevitably comes when what your identity was based on begins to collapse, and that's awful. Or it could be an ability. You are very good at something, but then at some point something happens and you are not good at it anymore, or somebody else suddenly comes who is so much better than you. One could give many examples. Knowledge, perhaps your mind doesn't retain the knowledge anymore, or it becomes redundant. Having an encyclopedic mind is no longer a great thing because the internet is always better, Wikipedia. So if sooner or later, if it's strength, then eventually you can't compete anymore. You get arthritis, can't jump high enough anymore. All these things, sooner or later, when your identity is based on form, then you begin to suffer. So it's vital to have both, but it's not easy because your form identity has its own kind of momentum. And that's the ego. The ego is anything you identify with as yourself becomes part of your ego identity. So form identity is ego. The ego is a formation, an energy field, an energy form in you that is quite refuses to go. It wants to survive as this particular form. It wants to defend its form. It wants to strengthen its form. So, although there may be, and the evolutionary impulse of the universe may be at work in you, which wants something else to arise, there may be the ego trying not wanting it to arise. And so you get scared of stillness or inner peace, can't sit still. You don't want to stop thinking because you think, I'm going to disappear if I stop thinking. And you want to continue to have opinions about who you are, the old opinions about who you are. And there have been spiritual teachers and spiritual masters and mystics throughout the ages have realized form identity, essence identity, and there is a whole stream of spirituality that is based on de-emphasizing your form identity. And of course, St. Francis is part of that stream of de-emphasizing form identity, not saying, look at me, I'm so good at this or that, but that says basically, I'm nobody in particular. That can go too far where it becomes another form, so you have to be very careful when that happens, because when you say, I'm the most miserable sinner, then that's not quite it. That's because that's another form identity. That can be even stronger than to say, I'm the most saintly person there's ever been. I'm the most miserable of sinners, so dreadful. But to de-emphasize form identity can be a wonderful thing. Once it requires enough presence so that you already can sense that which is beyond. And it starts with a little thing, like in a discussion, you're able to drop your particular viewpoint because it makes no difference whether you are right or wrong anymore. And you just let it go and feel quite liberated. It makes no difference whether who is right, he or the other person or you, who cares? And suddenly you feel there's a peace that comes there when you don't need to be right anymore. That's because to be right is one way in which people emphasize the me, make the other person wrong. So that's one way. Another, it can be very beneficial for some people who have been afflicted with some kind of suffering or disability, which may be physical disability or whatever it is, that makes it difficult for them to develop to have a well-developed form identity. Let's say somebody who is physically disabled, and so they can either seek refuge in some other area and become very focused on identifying with their mind or whatever. It can also happen that if there's one major thing that seems to interrupt the full development of your form identity, it can more quickly lead you to the realization of your essence identity. That is, there have been philosophers in the past or spiritual teachers who had disabilities, and it's because of their physical disabilities they were able to let go of identification with their unsatisfying form. If the form of you is unsatisfying, strongly unsatisfying, it can be an opening, an early opening into essence identity. The same thing happens when somebody loses all the things that they had identified with in their lives through some disaster that suddenly happens in you. Things are removed that you had considered to be an essential part of who you are, and life takes them away, and suddenly you are faced with that nothingness or emptiness. You don't know who you are anymore because life has taken away all those things that you identified with. And then it can happen, if you don't go into a contraction and quickly form another victim identity, that it opens up into the formless, the essence. That is the peace that passeth all understanding, as it's called in the New Testament. Because how can a person who's lost everything suddenly feel so peaceful? It can happen. It doesn't happen always, perhaps only in a small percentage of cases where people lose everything. The potential is there. Whenever there's great loss in your life, the potential is there for the arising of the essence identity, and that is grace. You can call that grace, the grace that is hiding on the other side of every disaster. It's hiding there. You just need to recognize it. But there is no need to wait for disaster to happen to you. But, and this is why we are here now, we don't want to wait for disaster, because that might be too late. It might not happen for a while. It will happen eventually. Disaster will come to all of you because, well, yes? Oh, yes, because you're going to die. The body is going to die. Old age will come, and then that'll be it. As somebody said, each one of us has already been diagnosed with a fatal illness leading to death. It's called life. On the surface level. Of course, it's... So, therefore, the ancient dictum of spirituality is find death before death finds you. Because death is going to find you. It's just a question of time. Now, what does it mean? Find death before death finds you. It means find that in you which is beyond death. So the death that you find refers to the death of the ego, the egoic identity in you, which when you discover the essence identity, then the ego identity begins to die. And that's a wonderful thing, but not to the ego. It doesn't mean that the forms disappear, but identification with the forms is no longer there. So you still have the same things as before, but the identification doesn't happen anymore. Traditionally, this is a very painful process, finding death before death finds you, without a strong spiritual energy that you come into contact with in one way or another. it's painful. The only way you can find death before death finds you is for life to knock you so hard that the ego gets knocked out of you.